Imagine grabbing your mail on a random Tuesday morning. You're pouring your coffee, tearing open a letter.
And it's a normal day.
Right, just a normal day. But inside, you find a massive, potentially business-ending financial penalty, and your stomach just completely drops.
Oh, absolutely. Total panic.
You start scrambling. You're calling your site managers, trying to figure out who got hurt on your watch. But here's the terrifying reality. Nobody got hurt.
Nobody at all.
Right. There was no accident, no ambulance. There was literally just a missing signature on a piece of paper. So welcome to the new reality of construction, safety compliance, and workplace liability in 2026.
Yeah, it is a profound shift in the rules of engagement. I mean, the grace period for minor infractions is officially over.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of companies are, unfortunately, about to learn that the hard way.
And that is exactly why we're tackling this today. Our mission for this deep dive is to equip you, the listener, with the ultimate survival guide for these sweeping changes happening in workplace enforcement right now.
It's vital information.
It really is. We're pulling these insights straight from the 2026 OSHA Enforcement Playbook, Compliance and Liability Strategies. And we're able to break this down for you today because this deep dive is driven by market intelligence and analytic reports from Smart Business Automator. They've been tracking these shifts across the entire industry, and the picture they paint is, it's intense.
Intense is a good word for it.
Yeah.
The overarching theme we really need to establish right at the top is this fundamental change in regulator psychology. OSHA is basically no longer in the business of handing out warnings.
Right.
The days of an inspector walking a site, pointing out a missing guardrail or a flawed logbook and telling your foreman to just fix it by Friday.
Yeah.
Those days are gone.
Wow, completely gone. Yeah.
When they arrive on site today, their primary intent is to issue citations. We've definitively transitioned from a cooperative sort of advisory approach to a strictly punitive enforcement model.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the playbook calls this the era of document-driven inspections. And honestly, that sounds like a dry corporate buzzword. But the reality on the ground seems like a nightmare for business owners. What does a document-driven inspection actually mean for, say, a mid-sized contractor listening to this right now?
It means that your entire safety culture is now judged almost exclusively by your administrative footprint.
Okay.
Historically, an inspector needed to witness an unsafe act or spot a glaring physical hazard to penalize you. Not anymore. Poor record keeping alone now triggers violations, even if 0 accidents have occurred on your site in a decade.
That's wild. So just the paperwork.
Just the paperwork. They're going to audit your training logs, your hazard communication plans, your daily safety briefings. If the paperwork is incomplete, out of date, or just missing a couple of worker signatures, you are in violation. The paper itself is now treated as a legal proxy for the physical safety of the site.
Wait, so if I'm a site manager, you're telling me I can get hit with a fine even if my job site is spotless, my crew is wearing all their gear, and we have a flawless safety record?
Just because of a missing signature on a morning briefing sheet?
Yeah.
Yes, that is the exact paradigm shift.
Unbelievable.
It's the equivalent of getting a massive speeding ticket while your car is parked safely in your driveway, simply because you couldn't produce the receipt for your last speedometer calibration.
That is infuriating. I can just imagine a foreman trying to wrangle 40 guys at 6:00 a.m., handing out assignments while desperately trying to make sure everyone signed the right box on some digital form. What happens if they miss one? What are the actual financial stakes here?
The financial stakes are what makes this a literal survival issue for a business. An average serious OSHA citation in 2026 is currently sitting at $15,625.
Okay, that hurts, but maybe you survive it.
Right, that's for a single standard serious violation. But if an inspector decides the violation is willful,
Meaning they think you did it on purpose.
meaning you knew about the rule but ignored it, or showed gross indifference, if it's deemed willful, those fines skyrocket to $156,259 per violation.
$250,000 for a clipboard error.
Very easily.
Yeah.
Because here's the crucial detail, and a lot of people miss this. These penalties stack.
Oh, man.
Yeah, they are not flat fees per inspection.
Huh.
Let's walk through a real-world scenario. Say an inspector looks at your logs and finds that you failed to provide documented fall protection training.
Okay, that's one citation.
Right, one serious violation. But then they find you also failed to log the daily inspection of the safety harnesses. That is another one.
Okay.
Now, let's say 4 of your workers are missing their specific heat illness certifications. That isn't one blanket violation for the crew. That can be interpreted as 4 separate violations.
So you multiply that $15,000 by 6 or 7 before the inspector has even stepped out of the trailer to look at the actual scaffolding.
Precisely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the market intelligence and analytic reports from Smart Business Automator really highlight how aggressively these financial penalties are reshaping the industry landscape. We're seeing established companies with pristine physical safety records facing absolute financial ruin simply because their back-end administrative compliance couldn't keep up. The financial burden is now the primary tool for industry regulation.
That really validates the frustration I hear from people in the industry. It feels like an impossible administrative overhead. But this raises an obvious question for me.
Sure.
Doesn't this hyper-focus on paperwork take the regulators' eyes off the actual physical dangers? Because people are still getting hurt out there, right? What is actually causing accidents in 2026?
The physical hazards certainly haven't disappeared, and the statistics on what is actually hurting workers remain incredibly stubborn. If we look at the data, gravity is still the undisputed #1 killer.
Gravity.
Yes. Falls currently account for 38.4% of all construction fatalities.
Almost 4 out of every 10 fatal accidents.
And here is the truly alarming part. This marks the 14th consecutive year that falls remain the absolute #1 cause of death on job sites.
14 years.
14 years. When a statistic remains that static for over a decade, despite massive advancements in harness technology, tie-off points, and site engineering, regulatory agencies take drastic measures. They look at that 38.4% and conclude that whatever the industry is currently doing, it simply is not working.
And we're seeing that regulatory reaction happen right now at the state level, aren't we? The actual rules around when you need to tie off are changing.
Drastically. OSHA, which is the state agency in California.
And they usually set the trends, right?
Exactly. They're notorious for setting the benchmark that the rest of the country eventually adopts. Well, they have just rewritten the rules of the game. They have lowered the fall protection trigger down to 6 feet for all construction activities.
Let's paint a picture of what that actually means on, say, a Tuesday afternoon on a job site. Under the old rules, what did a fall protection trigger look like compared to this new 6-foot rule?
Under the old federal standards, the triggers were often much higher, sometimes 15 feet or more, depending on whether you were doing steel erection or standard framing. A framer could be walking the top plate of a first-story wall, maybe 9 or 10 feet in the air, without necessarily needing a full personal fall arrest system.
Okay.
Now, under OSHA's new rule, that same framer is in violation before they even reach the second floor.
Think about that for a second. If you're standing on the 3rd or 4th rung of a standard stepladder, just to run a piece of conduit along a ceiling, your head and center of gravity are well over 6 feet off the ground.
It means that almost every single active worker on a commercial or residential build is now constantly crossing that regulatory threshold. It dramatically increases the sheer volume of safety gear required, the constant clipping and unclipping.
And the paperwork.
Yes, tying back to our earlier point, the massive amount of documentary compliance required just to do baseline everyday tasks.
But hold on. If the gear is better than ever and the rules are stricter than ever, why are falls still at 38.4%? Is it just workers ignoring the rules, or is there a root cause we're missing here?
The playbook highlights a root cause that the industry has historically ignored. It points to a silent killer underlying almost all of these accidents.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Fatigue is a contributing factor in a staggering 90% of construction accidents.
90%. That sounds incredibly high.
It is astronomical. When a fall occurs, investigators typically look at the physical equipment. Was a lanyard frayed? Did the anchor point fail? But they rarely investigate the cognitive state of the worker who forgot to clip in.
Ah, that makes sense.
Fatigue fundamentally impairs judgment. It slows reaction times and degrades balance. Working under extreme fatigue is a biological hazard that mimics the cognitive impairment of being legally intoxicated. It is just as dangerous as an exposed electrical wire, but much harder to spot on a clipboard.
And you really can't separate that level of fatigue from the environment these crews are working in. A 2.0 p.m. slump hits a lot harder when it's 95 degrees outside and you're wearing 15 pounds of gear.
Heat compounds exhaustion exponentially, and regulators are acutely aware of this.
And actually, the market intelligence and analytic reports from Smart Business Automator show a clear pattern here, linking the physical exhaustion of workers directly to the rising accident rates and the upcoming federal heat regulations.
Exactly. That is exactly why a federal heat illness rule is officially coming into effect in 2026.
What does a federal heat rule actually look like in practice? Is it just mandating extra water breaks?
It goes far beyond water breaks. It is a strict, federally mandated framework dictating rigid work and rest cycles, mandatory shade requirements, and strict acclimatization protocols.
Acclimatization, like getting used to the heat.
Yes, and that last one is huge. It means you cannot just hire a new worker and put them on a hot roof for 10 hours on their first day. You have to document a gradual ramp up of their exposure to the heat over several days.
So if a worker collapses from heat exhaustion and happens to fall off a ladder, is that a fall violation or a heat violation?
Under the 2026 enforcement model, an inspector will likely cite you for both. And then they will demand the paperwork proving you trained that specific worker on both hazards. If you lack the acclimatization log for that worker, you are looking at another stacked, willful violation.
Which brings us to the ultimate administrative compliance minefield, because keeping your workers safe from gravity and exhaustion is only half the battle now.
Right.
You also have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt who those workers actually are. And if I'm a contractor listening to this, I'm probably pulling my hair out thinking about the labor shortage. Let's look at the calendar. Today is March 5th, 2026. For anyone doing business in Ohio, a massive mandate shits on March 19th. That is exactly 14 days away.
It is a rapidly approaching cliff. Ohio is implementing mandatory E-Verify participation for contractors, and they are not alone. This is a cascading national trend. Over 25 states now have varying levels of E-Verify mandates.
For anyone lucky enough not to be deep in the weeds on human resources, E-Verify is the federal web-based system that allows employers to confirm the eligibility of their employees to work in the United States. And the enforcement around this has become incredibly stringent lately. The sources note that recent immigration enforcement actions have removed 532,000 authorized workers from the labor pool.
That number represents a massive structural shock to the industry. You have a severe collision of two massive forces here.
How so?
Well, on one side, contractors are facing a desperate shortage of skilled hands to meet project deadlines. On the other side, you have these rapid, strict state-level E-Verify mandates shrinking the available authorized labor pool by over 500,000 workers. What's fascinating here is how this creates an absolute compliance minefield.
It's the absolute definition of being caught between a rock and a hard place. Imagine you're a project manager staring at a Gantt chart. You have a massive concrete pour scheduled for tomorrow. If you don't staff that pour, you face brutal schedule delay penalties from the developer. But your labor pool is dramatically smaller and you are short 3 guys.
And if you misstep on the hiring compliance out of pure desperation to staff that pour,
like rushing the paperwork.
Yeah, maybe you rush an I-9 form or bypass the E-Verify check for just one day, you walk right back into the teeth of those stacking administrative fines we discussed earlier. The pressure to perform is pushing up against the most rigid paperwork requirements the industry has ever seen.
It's a trap.
It really is. An error in an employment verification check isn't just an HR headache anymore. It is a critical liability that can freeze an entire project and trigger simultaneous state and federal audits.
Okay, this paints an incredibly daunting picture. We're talking about strict liability, massive stacked fines, a shrinking workforce, and inspectors who are basically incentivized to find reasons to issue citations before they even look at your job site.
Yes.
How does a mid-sized contractor actually afford to keep up with this without going bankrupt? Because right now it feels like the only logical advice is to build a bunker and hide.
That is the natural emotional reaction. The immediate instinct for most business owners is to view all of this through the lens of fear. They look at compliance as a sunk cost, a heavy tax they just have to pay to stay out of trouble. But treating safety as a defensive chore is the wrong economic framework for 2026.
So what does this all mean? Let's pivot and talk about the actual economics of getting this right, because the playbook offers a massive silver lining for companies that choose to lean into this problem rather than run from it.
The return on investment for proactive safety and compliance is actually profound. The financial models show that for every single dollar a business invests in safety and prevention, they see a return of $4 to $6 in reduced costs.
A 400% to 600% ROI. That is staggering. You cannot get that kind of return in the stock market, and you certainly can't get it just by pushing your crews to work faster. But how does that actually manifest? How does $1 spent on a compliance app turn into $6 of profit on a dusty job site?
It manifests through systemic efficiency and risk mitigation. When you invest that dollar in top-tier digital compliance software, you aren't just buying a digital filing cabinet. We are seeing companies use geofencing on job sites, where workers are automatically logged in and their training certifications are verified the second they step onto the site.
Oh, that's smart.
Takes the iPad out of the foreman's hands and lets them focus on building.
So you're eliminating the administrative friction that leads to those $15,000 paperwork fines.
Exactly. But it goes deeper than that. When you use wearable tech to monitor heart rates and manage that 90% fatigue factor, you prevent the fall from happening in the first place. You drastically lower your workers' compensation insurance premiums.
Because you don't have the claims.
Right. You prevent the catastrophic downtime that occurs when a site is completely shut down for a 3-week OSHA investigation. You reduce material waste because well-rested workers make fewer mistakes.
And I imagine it plays a massive role in retention, too. In a labor market where 532,000 workers have just vanished from the pool, holding on to your skilled, authorized crew is everything. Workers want to be on a site where they know they aren't going to be pushed to the point of a fatigue-induced accident.
The data completely backs this up. The market intelligence and analytic reports from Smart Business Automator prove that proactive compliance is actually a high-yield business strategy, not just a defensive one. Their analytics clearly show that the most profitable construction firms in 2026 aren't the ones cutting corners to save a few hours.
They're the ones adapting.
They're the ones leveraging compliance as a competitive advantage. When your documentation is flawlessly automated, your e-verify systems are seamlessly integrated, and your safety protocols are proactively managed, you become a much lower risk partner. Major developers and insurance companies want to work with you. Proactive compliance transforms safety from a defensive, frustrating chore into an offensive engine for profit.
It changes the entire conversation. It means that updating your safety logs or investing in wearable tech isn't just about avoiding an inspector's wrath. It is literally making your company more valuable and more resilient.
Absolutely.
Let's take a breath and recap the journey we've been on today, because we covered a tremendous amount of ground. We started with the harsh reality that OSHA in 2026 is no longer your friendly neighborhood advisor. They are arriving to issue citations, and a missing signature alone can trigger a 6-figure penalty. We looked at the physical realities. Gravity is still the #1 killer, with falls stubbornly sitting at 38.4%, and OSHA is forcing the industry's hand with the new 6-foot trigger. We uncovered the terrifying reality that fatigue drives 90% of accidents, and massive federal heat regulations are incoming to address it.
And the labor shortage.
Right. We watched the 14-day ticking clock on the Ohio E-Verify mandate and explored the absolute minefield of staffing a job during a severe labor squeeze. And finally, we flipped it all on its head, proving that a single dollar proactively spent on safety and digital integration is actually the smartest investment you can make, returning up to $6 to your bottom line. You cannot claim ignorance anymore. If poor paperwork alone can trigger a business-ending fine, then hoping for the best is simply a strategy for bankruptcy.
It demands a complete operational shift. And this raises a really important question, something for you to consider as you look at your own operations. We know that fatigue is responsible for 90% of construction accidents. And we just established that investing in safety returns up to 6 times its cost in improved efficiency and reduced liability. So, is the ultimate safety and compliance strategy of future really just about buying a better harness or subscribing to fancier geofencing software?
What's the alternative?
Or, to truly eliminate the risk at its root, do we need to fundamentally redesign the hours, the expectations, and the physical structure of the standard American workday itself?
That is a massive question, and exactly the kind of deep thinking required to thrive in 2026 and beyond. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking the hard questions, keep refining your systems, and above all, stay curious. We will catch you next time.